Hey y'all, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about building our own power source for a kayak motor. In this case specifically, we are going to look at a power source for the Newport NK180, and this motor requires a 24 volt battery. So that's what we're going to be building, and we're going to do a 52 amp hour, which is more than I currently run, and this is going to give us a lot of capacity to cover water, explore more fishing spots, or just see more sites, whatever we want to use it for. So the battery I run now is a 24 volt 30 amp hour lithium iron phosphate. I picked this up for $300 from a little company called 2 Battery. It's a great battery. It only weighs 14 pounds. It fits in the rear hatch of the topwater PDL, but I want something with a little more capacity. So I built a 24 volt 52 amp hour battery that's going to give me significantly more runtime. It is going to add a little bit of weight, but I'm going to try to do it for a pretty cheap price, around $400. The problem if we are wanting to buy a battery, for example, this Dakota Lithium, they run $800 plus. And in addition to that price, they also weigh significantly more. So we're looking at 11 pounds more than the battery that we are going to build here. So even on the Battleborn, we're looking at $850 and 31 pounds. So our goal is going to be to create a cheaper, more lightweight battery with higher capacity. Obviously, this task is going to require that we buy some parts, so I have created a parts list for you guys. The most important things on this list are the lithium iron phosphate cells and then the BMS, the battery management system, and obviously all the hardware that we're going to need. So feel free to pause this and take a quick look, but I'm not going to read it all to you. I think it's fairly exhaustive, so let's move on. In terms of price, a bare bones setup is going to run us just under $400, and this is including our cells, our BMS system, all the hardware we need, a battery bag and heat shrink to kind of seal things up. But there are other things that you can buy to improve this build, and so if you do that, obviously it's going to cost a little more. So one tricky aspect of this build is going to be sourcing our 3.2 volt 50 to 52 amp hour cells. The seller that I used here on AliExpress seems to have run out of stock. I got these over Black Friday, so there were some discounts and everything, but there are a variety of sellers on AliExpress, and you just kind of have to take a chance, rely on reviews, how many sales they have, and find cells that are cost effective for our build, trying to keep the price down under $400. In addition to the cells, we're also going to have to source a BMS, and we're going to do this with an active balancer as well. So it's kind of a two-function deal. The BMS keeps the battery from overcharging and over discharging and keeps the amperage output below a certain threshold. If it goes over, it cuts it off. But we are going to need a BMS that is specifically for lithium iron phosphate batteries. We're going to need an 8 series because we're going to use 8 cells. And we're looking at one that's either 30 or 40 amps because the Newport pulls 25 amps max according to their specs. So either of these is going to do just fine for us. Hey y'all, just want to pop in here and say that if you are not able to or you are unwilling to make this battery on your own, I am happy to do it for you. I will do so at a competitive price, and I will do it to your spec. So if you see something in this video that you'd like to tweak or alter, I can definitely do that for you. You're going to be able to find this on my Big Cartel page. I will drop that link below or put it in a card here, and you guys can click on that and purchase that if you are interested. If you will need some more information, you can shoot me an email or comment below. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have. So yeah, let's get back to the video. So once we get our cells, our first step is going to be to group them into smaller groups of 4 and wrap them with some sort of tape or other material. I don't know what you would use, but I opted for clear duct tape. Feel free to use whatever color you want. But when we do this, we just want to make sure that the cells are pretty even, and we want to make sure that they're pressed together fairly tightly. There's a whole rabbit hole out there on YouTube with the solar community about whether compression with lithium iron phosphate cells is necessary. I just opted for compression in the sense that I'm taping them in 2 different directions so that they're grouped fairly tightly, and when I put both groups together, there is going to be a mild compression across all 8 cells. Wrapping the 2 groups of cells together into an 8 series group is pretty self-explanatory, but whatever method you use with the tape, we do just want to make sure that we're maintaining some pressure and so that there's not a whole lot of play between each individual cell. Our second step is going to be balancing each individual cell, or top balancing. The first option is just using an active balancer like this Heltec active balancer. You wire it up to all the positive terminals and one of the negatives, and you basically just let it run for a couple of hours or overnight, however long it takes. So if you can see here, the voltages are shown and there is a wide variance between each cell, but after running the BMS for a few hours, we can see that the cell voltages have migrated and they are much closer to one another. Now, the preferred option is using a DC power supply like the one you see here, where you can set a predetermined voltage, 3.65, which would be a full charge for a 3.2 volt cell. And you basically just put this on each cell and let it run. It charges each up to 3.65, and then it'll basically drop down to 0, delivering no power. You repeat this process 8 different times so that you have 8 cells that are right at 3.65. They're going to drift down, but that's going to put you at a really good starting place before step 3. Now we need to wire in our BMS and or active balancer. If you're doing just the BMS, it's just going to be one wire. We're going to start with the first negative wire. This is going to go to the first negative terminal on our first cell. Then we're just going to follow each wire. We're going to grab the second one. That's going to go to the first positive. The third wire is going to go to the second positive, and so on and so forth. So this is actually wiring without the active balancer, and it'd be just for the BMS, but this gives you an idea of the pattern. We essentially just follow all of the positive terminals after we've connected that first negative, and we're going to end on a positive as well. So that's where you should be after you've connected all of these strings. Now that you've seen the basic wiring pattern, we can go ahead and add our metal bus bars. These are going to start on the first positive terminal, and it's going to go positive to negative, and then on that same cell from positive to negative on the other side, and then you're just going to repeat that like it's shown here. Now, as you can also probably see, there are 2 wires coming out of each terminal. One is leading back to the BMS, the other is going back to the active balancer. We do need both if we want to use both, but the wiring pattern is still the exact same. We're just going to follow all of the positive terminals back. At some point, either before or after this process, you are going to have to create your own positive wire because the BMS does not have one. I used 8-gauge wire with a 1/4-inch ring terminal. This is going to be attached to our very last cell on the positive side. And then if we look at our BMS, we're going to notice 2 wires. We're going to take the blue, and that blue wire is going to need a terminal as well, obviously, but it's going to be attached to the negative side of our first cell. And then that leaves the black wire open. This black wire is going to be our wire on the negative side that goes out to our load, along with our red wire that we created that is the positive side that also goes out to our load. And just a quick note, you will want to use extra wire and connectors to extend this negative wire. Finally, we need to check that our wiring was done properly. We're going to do this with a multimeter. We're going to put our first black prong on the first negative terminal here on the BMS, that tiny little metal slot, and with the positive side we're going to go from the first all the way down to the last, and we're going to check the voltage. So initially we should have somewhere around 3.4, 3.5, and then it's going to double and then triple and so on and so forth. So with each little terminal that we're testing, it should be going up by about 3.4, 3.5 volts. Now that we've got the hard part out of the way, we want to go ahead and attach the BMS and balancer to the battery pack itself. This is where 3M strips or 2-sided tape is going to be your friend. We do just want to consider our placement because obviously we don't want to have the weight of the pack bearing down on the BMS nor the balancer. So I opted to put the BMS on the side. I organized the wires in a way that made sense to me with some electrical tape. Probably needs to be done with duct tape to have them a little more secure, but again, this is going to be wrapped up and there shouldn't be much play or any movement at all when it comes to the wiring leading to the BMS. As for the balancer, same process. I used little basically 2-sided sticky strips. Now I'm going to place the active balancer on the front side of the pack so that I have access to it after it's heat shrinked, because I'm going to upgrade it to an active balancer with the Bluetooth technology so that I can monitor each cell and the balance and just kind of keep an eye on things. And once the balancer's in place, we just want to clean up the wires in a way that you see fit. This next step is going to be optional. I wanted to install a battery monitor that would let me power it on and see what voltage I have and see what the temperature is inside of the pack and bag itself. This battery monitor, you can also program certain things into, like a low voltage alarm. There's some other features, but those are the three main things that I wanted access to when I'm out on the water using this battery and it's going to be bagged up. I just want to, keep an eye on things. After doing this, you'll want to return to step 4, which is just briefly organizing some wires. But as you guys can see here, I've extended my positive and negative wires going to my load. I've also added a 30 amp inline fuse. This will blow far before the BMS ever cuts things off. It's just an extra added layer of security. It's not 100% necessary, but I do think it's necessary to extend your wires from the BMS to your load because it gives you a little more flexibility inside your battery bag or pack, however you're going to use this. Before starting the last step in the process, I wanted to take the pack out and just try it to make sure everything was running smoothly. So I plugged it into my Newport NK180 with my Anderson SB50 connectors there. That's what I opted to use. You guys are free to choose whatever you want. They're going to work. Just make sure it can handle 25 amps. And once I plugged it in, things were running smoothly, so we're looking good. The only thing left for us to do now is to add an additional layer of protection. You might think this is a little bit overkill, and maybe it is, but I'm very paranoid about water getting into my terminal somehow in my battery and shorting things out because, after all, I am out there on the water. I'm out there in different conditions. So I opted to use marine grade heat shrink to cover all 8 cells. I'm not going to cover them completely, but I am going to cover them in a way that protects the top terminals, which are going to be on the upper side of my bag. Even though they'll be covered, I just want that extra layer of protection. And then, of course, we do have the tape that we use to wrap up all the cells. So really, this whole pack should be completely watertight, water resistant. There shouldn't be anything getting in there, but in the case that something gets in the bag, this is at least going to help us and give us a little more peace of mind out there on the water. Speaking of the bag, this is just something I use more for transport and movement than it is for protection, although it does provide an extra layer of security. It's got a handle on top. It's easy to move around this way. That's my preference when it comes to these kind of batteries because it doesn't come with a box. But I do want to point out that this bag is not being used in the case of a fire, right? These bags are used for a different type of lithium battery. Lithium iron phosphate batteries are known to be much safer and are not just going to spontaneously combust even if they short out. So I'm not using it for this reason. It's mostly to keep water out and just for transportation. And once everything's built, wrapped, and put in the bag, it's probably a good idea if you've got any desiccant packs laying around to throw a few in there just to keep any moisture out of there in the case that it does manage to creep in. That is going to do it for this build. This was actually pretty easy and I am super excited to get out on the water. Unfortunately, it is quite cold out and I'm probably going to have to wait unless I want to go out on a cold day, but I have been using this battery with the Newport Outback, just letting it run, and it seems like it's going to have really good capacity. I am going to test it. And I will let you guys know in the future. So if you want to check back for videos on updates on the DIY 24-volt battery, there will be some posted. If you made it this far in the video, thanks for watching. I hope this is helpful to you. Build your own battery, save some money, and I'll see you next time.